let me share my screen. Okay. All right, is everyone seeing my screen okay? All right, oops, why did I do that? Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the TGfU 40th anniversary webinar series, Introduction to Game-Based Approaches, seminar number 4, the last seminar, which is we are going to cover the topic 5, which is lesson planning and the structure of lesson and the practice. Hello everyone, my name is Kanae Haneishi, and I am the associate professor at Western Colorado University in the US. And I am also the representative of the United States as the TGfU SIG International Advisory Board member. So we are going to have a question and answer session at the end of the session today. But if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to write your questions or comments in the chat. And then, like I said at the beginning, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. We love to know who is here today with us. So TGfU, Teaching Games for Understanding, SIG, Special Interest Group, is a worldwide organization that is represented by TGfU experts from all over the world. So these are the 5 critical components for learning to teach and coach with game-based approaches. So 5 critical components are: number 1, tactical concept and problems; number 2, game modifications; number 3, using questions and diffraction; number 4, authentic gameplay assessment; and number 5, lesson planning. So far with this webinar series, we have covered topic 1 through 4. And then today, as the last session, seminar 4, we are going to cover the lesson planning part of the critical components. So lesson topic 5 is a lesson planning. So today we let's see. I'm sorry. Okay, so here are the 4 international advisory board members who will be presenting today. So Dr. Sanmuga Nathan is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sports Science and Coaching at the Sultan Idris Education University in Malaysia. He has been lecturing courses in the area of physical education, teacher education, sports science, and the track and field. He has supervised students for undergraduate, master's, and PhD programs, mainly in the area of TGfU, sports pedagogy, and coaching. He had served as the school teacher more than 20 years before becoming a senior lecturer in 2008. So he's also the IAB International Advisory Board representative for Malaysia. Dr. Shane Phil is an associate professor at Flinders University, Australia. He is the Australian TGfU IAB representative and the TGfU SIG Leadership Fellow as well. He is a former health and physical education teacher for 18 years, and since 2016, he teaches and researches in physical education, sports coaching and development, pedagogy and curriculum studies. Shane has published extensively with both empirical work and scholarly explanation. And Dr. David Gutierrez, from Spain, is a full professor in Faculty of Education of Ciudad Real at the University of Castilla-La Mancha. His research focus is on model-based physical education, principally TGfU and sports education, and on the increase of movement time during the school day to improve children's school wellness. And again, my name is Kanae Haneishi from the United States. So here is the outline of today's webinar. So number one, David will cover the basics of the lesson planning and structure in game-based approach lessons. And then Shane will cover the play with purpose. And then Sanmuga will cover the lesson plan example with field hockey. And I will cover the lesson plan example with soccer and non-linear approach. And then we will finish with the questions. Okay, now I am going to hand it to David, who will be covering the basic structure of game-based approach lesson plan.
Hello, thank you, Kanae. Well, as Kanae said, I will try to explain or show firstly, the main basic or elements of lesson structure and planning, and then show different examples. Because next slide, please. Okay, firstly, what does a game-based approach lesson look like? That's something that is important. When we watch our partner, our coach, somebody teaching through game-based approach, normally we see small side games, we see reflections, we can see different kind of performance levels playing together. Sometimes we see not the same sports, but modify in a different way, different variations. And normally we are watching kids playing because the game will be at the center of the lesson. So next slide, please. And that center place in the game is also in the definition that Teaching Games for Understanding Special Interest Group did as a statement to define and to gather together all different definitions and approaches into the game-based consensus statement, which says that game-based approach refers to learner-centered teaching and coaching practice in which the modified games set the base and the framework. So the modified game would be all the time at the center of the lessons. So next slide, please. So let's see the lesson structure. So we will see that the beginning was the TGfU model and the wheel of learning, but then there have been different proposals in terms of modification and application. The first idea of the TGfU model. Next slide. So in the TGfU model proposed by Bunker and Thorpe, the lesson begins with the game. Then we understand the game and the rules. In the second step, game appreciation, is a tactical awareness. The players show that they understand what to do by playing and then by reflecting with the teacher. Then we pass how to do it. So in terms of how to practice the solution to that problem set in the game. If necessary, we practice the skill execution, which is the solution to the game, to tactical problems set in the game. And in the sixth step, we measure the performance in the game, and then we come back to. So all learning process begin playing the game and end in the game. So next step. So even the game is at the center in the lesson all the time. We don't have to forget that the learner is the very center of the lesson. So even if we are preparing different games, questions, etc., the learner will be that we really lead our decisions during our teaching in terms of designing previously to the lesson and during our decisions during the lesson. In this proposal of TGfU model or wheel, the why is before the how. So the problem is the important thing. And then when we understand and practice the problem, then we practice and address the how, which is the skills normally. And the game is the main teaching and learning context, as I said. But this TGfU model was, even if very advanced, comparing with the traditional model in terms of it's a very learning center and focus on the learning process. It's still a little complicated for teachers to translate into normal PE lessons. For these reasons, next slide, please. Other approaches like tactical game model, trying to simplify and give teachers and coaches different tools to programming and applying game-based approach. For example, tactical game model propose a 3-step wheel, which is game practice wheel, game practice game, with 3 steps like playing the game, what to do, and how to do it. So next slide, please. So in this very simplified TGfU lesson, which is the tactical game model, as I said, the main structure is game practice game. And we have different reflections in between of the different main parts of the lesson. When we set a game-based approach, lesson goal, we normally, or we should, base this lesson on tactical learning, and then taking in mind the skills to solve the tactical problems. The game will be modified games that leads the learner to focus on the goal of the lesson. So that game should be designed to make clear and to practice tactical problems and skills that we want to address during that lessons. The practice allows the learner to work in a skill or solution in a more simplified way. So once we understand the problem, then we need to practice, sometimes, not all the time, we need to practice in a more simplified way that skill to help the learner and the player to solve more efficiently the problem. The reflections increase understanding and connection between the what and the how. So next slide, please. So remember that we simplify the TGfU model 6 steps into 3 steps, game, practice, game, which doesn't mean that you need only to cover 3 activities. You have different activities in between, before and after. In the screen, you can see a proposed by Garcia Lopez and Gutierrez, which amplify and explain the different full lesson, still based on game, practice, game, but with initial reflection, final reflection, and also you can also include additional lesson elements as an introductory game, the adjustment phase during game 1, to be sure that the game is development appropriate for all students. And in the game 2, we can add different strategies to increase understanding, like timeouts, freeze, and practice or peer evaluation. But again, we need to remember that we are in game-based approach. The main or the simple schema is game, practice, game. And we begin with the game, solve a problem, practice solution if we need, and come back to the game. All reflections and learning should be focused or around the game, the modified game we designed for the lesson. So next step. Another proposal, this by Butler, and also covered the same cycle of game, practice, game. is this 10-step lesson, and introduce different variation of the lesson, but it still is the same. Okay, we start with modified game. We observe the gameplay efficiently, which is not only about what we have to design, but what are the main duty of the teacher or the coach during this step. Emphasize playing, then go to question and answers, connecting this lesson with the last, which is very similar to the initial reflection we in the last proposal I showed. And again until we conclude. And Bartel proposed, for example, that the last step should be a competition between evenly matched teams or players. So different proposals, there is not a fixed schema. We can use different structure for a lesson, but still we have the same main elements on it. That's the message I want to send. So next slide, please. For lesson planning, in terms of what when I'm designing a full block unit or season, we have two main options and a lot of them in between. The first option is to have a full tactical and skill schema or planning, and then decide which tactical problem we are addressing and the skill to to solve this problem. For example, in this table by Mitchell, Osnell, and Griffin, we can decide that my lesson will focus on keeping possession, and passing will be the skill. So the goal will be keeping possession through passing. We can add different levels of specification. For example, we can say that we are keeping possession when we are after restarting the game in our field, or we can also say how many players will be in this situation, if we have superiority or inferiority. So we can make more information the goal, but the more important thing would be the tactical problem and the skill to solve it. Okay, so this way we will cover in the full planning, the full map of tactical problems and skills. So next step. Next slide, please. The second option would be not have a very extracted planning, but increase the complexity of the game or scenarios in terms that we are covering different learning issues through different games, and then we are addressing depending of what the lesson is evolution and what kind of learning our players are discovering and covered. We are increasing the complexity of the scenario and covering by step by increasing complexity, but keeping in mind mainly everything what we can have in a sport or in a category. So I hope it will be understood as a summary. Game is in the center. No, sorry. The learner is in the center, but the lesson has the game as the main focus. What we address the goal, and we refer to this game in terms of reflection in all the lesson. So different proposals, same main elements, and the learner in the center. Thank you very much.
Looks like over to me. Thank you, Kanae. My name's Shane Naimani. Hope you are all well. I'm presenting from Ghana Miana Yurta, which is the Adelaide Plains of South Australia. Next slide. A lot of the times, the game-based approach gets misinterpreted as game only. So in the work that I do, I've tried to clarify the role of the game, practice, peer coaching, and other teaching styles within a game-based approach, so that people understand that it's quite a sophisticated methodology and is not as simple as making a game or playing a game form. I call this work play with purpose. The word purpose is intentional because the game has an educative focus. It's there as the primary reason to stimulate cognitive, associative,
Hey Siri,
emotional.
stop the music.
Sorry, was that a question for me? Okay, so play is central to the educative purpose of a game-based approach. We start off with a period of play. The teacher stands back and observes. The teacher is looking for that moment where they're going to open up the game as an inquiry space, stops the play, and begins a reflective episode using their question strategies. We call that the inquiry episode. After the inquiry episode, the teacher needs to decide, do we go back to the game, having shaped and focused the player's thinking? Do we need to go into a practice task in order to develop an aspect of the game before we go back to play? After practice, we go back to play to test whether the learning has occurred from the practice to improve the play of the game. Or after the inquiry episode, it's revealed that the players are ready for an elevated challenge and they go to the next game form. Or it could be differentiated. After the inquiry episode, we use our teaching craft to send some players back to the game that we started the lesson with, because that's what they're ready for. Some players need to break out into a practice because they weren't ready for that first game and they need to practice an element before going back to the game. But there may be some players who are further developed and they need the added challenge of going to a more complex or next game version. We call this a non-linear pedagogy. Teaching games for understanding goes through 6 steps in a linear or sequential fashion. Tactical games model goes step 1, 2, 3 in a linear or sequential fashion. So they're called a linear pedagogy. In a non-linear pedagogy, the craft of the teacher comes in at the inquiry episode and they decide whether to go back to play, another game form, or into practice. Next slide, please. So when we do our lesson planning, we think first of all about the association of that first game to the readiness of our players. So this first game, we're not introducing anything new. We're doing what we call in every subject area retrieval practice. We are consolidating our understanding of the students' knowledge, skills, and understanding to find out whether the students are where we think they should be before we add something new in the lesson. So we're using our observation skills to make an assessment of whether the students are ready to progress or they're at a standard that they need to stay at. We then progress to the inquiry episode and we've pre-planned the questions that we're going to ask at this moment, because in that first game, we know the moment that we're waiting for, because we know the game that we have selected or that we have planned will have a particular moment. And that particular moment is the teaching episode. We're waiting for that moment. We pause at that moment, and then we go into our pre-planned questions in order to analyze what has happened in that moment. Next slide, please. After the inquiry episode, we make a decision to go back to play, having shaped and focused the player's thinking. That is one of the options that we have after the inquiry episode. Next slide, please. Another option from the inquiry episode is to practice an aspect of the game isolated from the game. After we have done that practice and we think the players are ready to go back to the game, we consolidate what we've learned in the practice by putting it back into the game to see whether the player's gameplay improves. Next slide, please. Or we've done the practice session to learn something new And having learnt something new, we are ready for a new game form, because the purpose of the practice was to prepare the players to play the next level of challenge, the new game form. Next slide, please. This is the template that we use with our pre-service teachers to help them scaffold that play with purpose. Starting from the top and working our way down, we're going to put in our name. We've got our date that we're teaching. We've got the topic, invasion games, net court games, target games, whatever the topic is that we are doing. We put in our learning intentions. That'll be a tactical question or a tactical aim or a tactical purpose. The performance standards will come from our curriculum framework. In South Australia, we use the Australian Curriculum for Health and Physical Education. If it's year 6, we'll be using Band 3 performance standards. Those performance standards will then track back and think, what do the students need to understand in order to operate at that standard? What do the students need to know to operate at that standard? What do the students need to be able to do to operate at that standard? We'll think about the safety conditions of the environment that we are working in, and we will plan to mitigate any risks that might be elements in that environment. If we have students with special needs, we will plan on how we can include those students with special needs meaningfully in the lesson, and we'll plan out the equipment that we need. We'll then get into the tasks of the lessons. We'll plan out the number of minutes on the left-hand side. The lesson will start with an introduction where we use our explicit teaching strategies to let the students know why we're doing what we're doing today, how it has connected in the past, and what is good enough by the end of the lesson. We'll then get into our main tasks, the games that we're going to use, the questions that we're going to ask, how the different game forms are sequenced. And then at the end of the lesson, we will have some activity that will consolidate and confirm understanding before we leave the lesson. Next slide, please. The example I'm going to use now comes from Dr. Mitch Hewitt's work. He's a specialist in teaching tennis in physical education, and he helped design this resource, Tennis for Secondary Schools. What you see on the page now has all of those elements that were in the previous diagram that I showed. Tactical concept is stated. The learning intention, know, do, and understand are related to the aspects of the achievement standard that are being taught in this lesson. The content description of what the students will practice, apply, and transfer is stated. The environment has been thought about. The equipment is identified. Next slide, please. Focus questions are identified, pre-planned. The awareness talk around how to perform with respect, trust, relationally in the lesson is there. We have a pre-assessment activity to find out what the students already know, do, and understand about the concept that we're teaching this lesson, so that we can know whether anything has changed at the end of the lesson. Next slide, please. We then have our games. Our games have our scaled challenge point, so that for the students who aren't ready for the game that we have described, we know how to decrease the complexity so they have an inclusion point where they will be successful. For the students whose challenge point is above this game, we don't want them to be bored during the lesson. So we also plan how we can elevate, change to make it more challenging with an added layer of complexity so those students can continue their development. We've identified we'll start with game 1, which is called Countdown. Game 2 takes the same challenge, the same tactical idea, progresses it to the next level. Next slide, please. So we've got the 3 options of the game that we will play. At the end of the lesson, we have our consolidation activity, where we get the students to reflect on the 4 things they learnt today, the 3 questions that they have, so that we can help them progress their understanding by knowing what their gaps in knowledge are, the 2 things the students want to explore further, which we can probably set some activities to help them with offline as homework tasks, and what challenged them. In this way, we are making the students' thinking visible, as well as consolidating their understanding, so we know what to return to as a refresher, as a reminder, or that we need to continue to develop at the start of the next lesson before we introduce the new learning. Next slide, please. This work I've explained in the textbooks Play with Purpose. Play with Purpose for fundamental movement skills teaching was the first game-based resource for fundamental movement skills, designed to take students from what we call kindergarten or reception to grade 4. We're developing their game sense during this fundamental movement skill stage. And then that second resource called Game Sense to Sport Literacy takes the students from game sense to the expanded concept of sport literacy, where the students are able to use their knowledge of games and sport for active and healthy lives, not just so that they're healthy, but their communities are healthy as well. Thank you. Next slide.
Sanmuga, are you ready? Oh, okay. No, we can hear you. Do you wanna reconnect the microphone maybe? Do you wanna mute, not unmute maybe? We were able to hear you before that session, so. Sometimes like leaving and coming back in might work. Do you want me to start my lesson first and then you do after me? Okay. What we're gonna do is while we are waiting for Sanmuga to come back, I am going to present my part, and then Sanmuga can follow after. So I'm gonna skip these. So into my part. Okay, so I am going to now introduce the lesson plan. So me, Kanae, and Sanmuga will introduce the lesson plan. So my lesson plan example is with soccer with a non-linear approaches. So Shane covered a little bit. So non-linear approaches that you have modification plan for individual students within the lesson plan. So you'll see. Anyway, so I'm gonna dive in. So I guess the main here are the main components of the game-based approach lesson plan. Everyone has a different lesson template, which is fine, but this is what I use with my student. So these are the components that in that lesson plan. So name of the game, tactical problems, and then lesson focus, which is the tactical focus, and then the learning objectives, which include psychomotor, cognitive, and affective, aligned with the standards that we use in United States. We have a state standard. Each state has a different standard. So most of our students are used our state standard. And then we have teacher goals, management plans, equipment needs and resource. And then the main part of the lesson plan, instruction now and activity tasks with the transition plan between activities. With the game-based approach lesson plan, there's an introduction, and then again, there's a transition plan between, and the game 1, and then practice task, and the game 2. And then again, there's a transition plan between, and then there's assessment plan and closure. So each of the components of the activity has modification plans, and then teaching cues and questions, and the organization tasks. So I am going to use soccer lesson plan for the 11th grade. So it's gonna look like this. More is a bigger picture with the more bigger papers, but name of the game is soccer. And then for this example, the tactical problems is maintaining possession. And the tactical focus is providing a proper support in order to maintain the possession. And then the learning objectives and standards is a psychomotor. Objectives is student will be able to move to the open space where they can effectively receive a pass from a teammate 70% of the playing time. And then this little number here, S2, H5, L1 is that just a standard number that we use in United States or states, I guess. And then cognitive objectives is student will be able to explain what triangle support means 2 out of 3 times when it is asked. So again, the standard numbers there. And then the affective domain student will be able to include all teammates in group discussion. And then after the objectives, we have teacher goals, management plans, equipment need and resources that they all have the student notes, the pre-service teachers, and then teachers need to list this in the lesson plan. For the purpose of showing this unique component of the game-based approach lesson plan, and with the time we have today, I am going to just cover the game 1 and the practice task and game 2 part of the lesson plan. Okay, so the game 1, remember the tactical problem is the maintaining the possession. So Sanmuga, I'm starting my part, and then maybe we
okay,
can.
right.
Yeah, now we can hear you. Perfect. Okay, so the tactical problem of this soccer lesson was the maintaining a possession, and then tactical focus was the provide a proper support. So when you don't have a ball, right? So the game 1 is a keep away games, either 3v3 or 4v ball, depending on how many students you have in the class. And the objectives of this game is to keep the ball away from the other team as long as possible by passing the ball among teammates. And then each team gets 1 point after they make the 5 consecutive passes. And then in order to emphasize the passing components of the game, we add the rules that everyone only can take a max of 3 touches. So nobody, those skilled players cannot dribble and keep the ball. And then we use cold defense so we can emphasize the offensive side of that game. So what is cold defense is, so there are cold defense, warm defense, and hot defense we use. The cold defense is that defender has to be arms lengths away, and so they cannot tackle or they cannot steal the ball from the person. So then hot defense is like 100% live defense. And then warm defense is somewhere between, depending on the student. So in this scenario, we use cold defense so we can emphasize the offensive side of the game. So the possession only changes when someone intercepts the ball or ball gets out of the play. So then for the modification wise, as a class, if the teachers see that, majority of students are struggling playing 3v3 or 4 people keep away game, they the teacher can make the grid bigger to make it easier, or depending on that each grid. So you have several grids to playing. So if you have a grid that doing really good, they can make that grid smaller to make it more challenging. And then also you can change that defensive rules, cold, warm, hot defense, depending on if you want to make it harder or if you want to make it more challenging. And then if you really have a student that having a trouble controlling the ball, you can change that size of the ball. And then in addition to that, individually, you can also make modifications. So if you have a student, students who are having a trouble playing this game successfully, you can allow certain students to have more than 3 touches, or you can modify cold, warm, hot defense to the individual students. So that's the non-linear approach that Shane was talking about too. Then after, students play the game 1, keep away games for depending on amount of the time, class time, but 10 minutes or so. The teacher frees the game 1 and bring everyone to the one of the grids and then ask questions. So that then these are the question, planned questions. So teacher asks questions, something like this. So what is the goal of this game? So before student play this game 1, so teacher are not really adjusting like purpose of the game and stuff like that. Just simply adjust the rules and let them play first. And then coming into this question part. So what is the game of this? What is the goal of this game? And then expected answer, EA will be keeping the ball away from the other team. And then teacher can follow up questions there. What do you need to do in order to maintain better possession and then play this game more successfully? And then expected answer will be moving to the open space. Or some student might say, talking to each other, have a better communication among the team, or controlling the ball and passing the ball with an accuracy. So that more related to the skill execution. So student can come up with the different answers. And then go to the transition question. So then teacher can say something like this. Those all answers are really important points to keep the ball as a team. So today, let's focus on learning more how to support your teammate who has the ball. Then follow up with these kind of questions, plan the question. So like when you try to receive the ball, yes, you try to move the ball to open space. That this is like follow-up question from the answer that previous in the previous slide. So then you can teacher can ask questions like, so what is the open space? You say like move it to the open space, move it to the open space. But what is the open space means? And the estimated answer, expected answer could be like, okay, well, where there's no defender. So then you can have teacher can have a follow-up question. Can you be in an open space but behind a defender? And they say no. And then why not? So because the defender can block the path in a pathway of the pass. So while asking these questions, the teacher should demonstrate some of the open spaces using that student in that grid that the teachers are using. So the visual learners can see the situation, the game situation, visually. So that's kind of modification plan there too. So teachers should have these modification plans. How can you apply into the different, diverse type of learners? Then going into the practice task. So practice task doesn't have to be always skill focused, because this lesson focuses really tactical component, which is like supporting, providing a proper support was a tactical focus. this practice part is the students are playing 3 versus 1 keep away. So 1 defender and then 3 offensive players in the square grid. And then like once again, use a cold defense so we can emphasize the offensive part of the game. And then once again, everyone is limited to the 3 touches. So no skilled players are dribbling the ball, or we can really emphasize the passing component of that game. Then modification wise, once again, depending on if the teacher wants to make it harder or easier, they can make the grid bigger or smaller. And then again, teacher can modify cold, warm, or hot defense, or and then also switch that 1 defender in the middle by time. So everyone does the defense. So everyone has opportunity to be outside on the offensive part and the defensive part. And the individual modification here for the nonlinear approach as well is to, if teacher has a student has having a hard time controlling the ball, have them have more than 3 touches, unlimited touches, or have them have a cold, warm, hot defense. If you have really experienced students, the defender doesn't have to do the cold defense for that student. Yeah, so you can make the individual adjustment by changing those rules. So then they explain and demonstrate the concept of the triangle support here, triangle support here. So when the ball moves to another teammates, the player with the red star on this slide needs to move to another open space to maintain the triangle shape and support the ball carrier. So as you can see, the player with the red star moved to another open space as the ball was passing to another person. So the ball carrier should always have at least 2 options. That's the concept of the triangle pass. And then they play this, small size 3v1 keep away game focusing on the triangle support. And then going to about, again, 10 minutes or so. And then summarize the triangle support concept before moving into that game 2. So how do you support your teammate who has the ball? Move it to the open space. And then another follow-up question can be, can you be behind the defender? Again, some review what we've been talking about. No, we need to show the pathway of the pass. And after this kind of this reflection and discussion, moving to the game 2. So game 2, playing the same rules with the game 1, but then you add 2 goals on each side. So the game become, instead of keep away with non-directional, have a more direction in the game. So that's become more closer to the actual soccer game. And now objective of the game becomes to score a goal. And we keep the same rules. Everyone can only have a max of 3 touches to emphasize the passing component of the game. And then again, same cold defense. So the possession changes only when the intercept and ball out of bounds. And then once again, teacher can make the similar modifications depending on if they want to make it easier or more challenging, and as well as the individual modification as well. And then with the game 2, the teacher frees the gameplay when teacher sees that teaching moments and then asks the planned questions such as, are you in a space where no defenders, open space? And are you behind the defender? So no. Can you see the pathway to receive the pass? Or where is the triangle now? So keep asking these questions to help students recognize the triangle support concept. And then if not, ask the student to move where she or he can receive the pass, and then going back to the right play. So these are the example of game-based approaches using practice game concept, and then how the lesson plan would look like. So that was the soccer. So now I'm gonna pass on to Sanmuga. He's gonna be showing another example of game-based approach lesson plan with field hockey. Okay, let me go to that. Here we go. Sanmuga, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Kanae. First of all, sorry for the technical glitches just now. Okay, kind regards to one and all from Malaysia. I am humbly like to present my lesson plan based on field hockey. Kanae, next slide, please. All right, my lesson plan, I follow this structure whereby I combine TGfU tactical game model. This is my version. All right, you can see that in the figure, there are a few activities, planned activities. First of all, the teacher will start with game-based warm-up activities, and then followed by tactical discussion. The teacher will be using a guided discovery, question and answer, to answer the question, how to do. The teacher will help the student to discuss, for example, in an invasion game, whether you are in the attacking strategy, whether you want to pass or whether you want to dribble. When you want to pass to your teammates, what your teammates supposed to do. So the teammates supposed to open space. This kind of thing the teacher will discuss in the tactical question and answer. After discussing about tactical decision-making question and answer, teacher will organize a small gameplay one, whereby the student will demonstrate and apply the tactical decision-making, what they discuss in the gameplay one. They will play for several minutes. So the idea is that the student must understand what to do, whether to dribble, for example, whether to pass, whether to open space, whether to do man-to-man marking, so on. That is a tactical application in gameplay one. And then after gameplay one, teacher will assemble the student. This time, teacher will discuss about skill. Using a poster and cues, teacher will discuss how to execute, for example, a dribbling skill in hockey. And then the student will discuss, student will give answers. And then after that, teacher will organize practice, maybe a dynamic skill drill practice. If the student is cannot execute well the skill, teacher might use static dribbles for a short period of time. After practicing drills, the teacher will organize another gameplay too, so that the student can apply whatever skill they have learned in the gameplay too. All right. And then next stage, the accumulation activities in gameplay 3. Whatever they study for the day, whether they learn about tactics, whether they learn about skill, and then they recap whatever they have learned in earlier lesson, the student will utilize them and demonstrate in gameplay 3, which is more difficult task. And then in the stage 6, the accumulation and tactic gameplay 3, hereby the teacher will using a game assessment instrument to evaluate, to assess students' psychomotor skill, cognitive decision making, and then the affective domain skill. And then stage 7, it will be a cooling down and limbering down activities with teachers and student reflection. Next slide, please. All right, I'm giving you an example in the field of hockey. I'll be giving you a full lesson plan. And then before planning a full lesson plan, the important things I will lift a learning standard from Malaysian school lower secondary school curriculum. Okay, whereby enshrine the curriculum, the learning standard. For example, the student able to justify when and where to use dribbling skills or passing skills in hockey. This is a cognitive decision-making learning standard. And then followed by able to execute dribbling skill of loose dribble, close dribble, and Indian dribble in field hockey gameplay situation. This is a psychomotor skill. And then thirdly, the effective domain, whereby the student is able to demonstrate cooperation and responsible value while engaging in the gameplay activities. Based on learning standard, I have planned a full lesson plan. You can see after this. Next slide, please. Here goes the full lesson plan. This is a demography part of the lesson plan. Okay, based on the learning standard, the teacher have introduced a topic, attacking and defending strategy using dribbling in field hockey. That is the topic of the day. Based on the learning standard, I have created a learning objective is more specific. The cognitive domain, student able to discuss and apply when to pass or dribble during attacking and defending strategy in 3 versus 3 and 4 versus 3 small-sided gameplay, meaning to say that in this cognitive domain, student know when to dribble or when to pass. This is cognitive tactical decision making. Okay, next, psychomotor skill, student able to execute loose dribble, close dribble, and Indian dribble technically sound, at least 2 trials each in 3 versus 3 and 4 versus small-sided gameplay. That means students supposed to demonstrate good technical skill of dribbling. And then next, the effective domain, student able to cooperate and take responsibility while engaging small-sided gameplay. This is 3 learning objectives. Based on 3 learning objectives, teacher will provide teaching aids, video, pictures with cues and clues. And then most important thing, based on the learning objective, the teacher will prepare what you call authentic game observation instrument to assess the tactical decision making, whether to dribble or whether to pass. And then for the psychomotor domain, the teacher will assess using gameplay observation instrument to assess their technical skill of dribbling, 3 types of dribbling: loose dribble, close dribble, and Indian dribble. And whereas the effective domain, the student again, the teacher or the student will be using authentic gameplay instrument to assess the effective domain, cooperate and taking responsibility, whether they're able to do that in the gameplay. So based on the learning standard, this is a demography of the lesson plan. Next slide, please. This is the full version of the lesson plan, as I mentioned earlier in the structure of the lesson plan. Okay, the full lesson plan comprised of learning development phase, teaching and learning activities, organization, discussion using guided discovery, question and answer. At the first phase, teacher will introduce the lesson, the hockey lesson here, indirectly. The teacher will show video or picture and then ask them, what are you going to study today? What are you going to learn today? The student, probably they'll answer, today we are going to learn a dribbling skill. Okay, teacher say, great, you have said the right answer. So how many types of dribbling? The teacher will prompt and the student will answer 3 types of dribbling. Why do you dribble the ball? What is the reason of dribbling ball? The student will answer, to control the ball and to outwit opponent while in the attacking and defending strategy. All right, after earlier question and answering, and then teacher will progress in dynamic warming up. The student will roll and tap hockey ball, and then they play 1 versus 1 gameplay. This is more on dynamic warming up with stretching. And then followed by phase 2. In phase 2, teacher will discuss using question and answer the tactical element, tactical decision making, what to do. When are you attacking, what skill do you use? The student will answer, maybe we're using passing or dribbling skill. When do you do dribbling skill? When there is opponent in front. When there is no opponent in front, we'll use dribbling skill. When the opponent is in front, we will pass the ball. We expect our teammate to open the space. Okay, teacher will say, great, good. Whatever you said, please demonstrate it in gameplay 1. The student will demonstrate whatever tactical decision making have they learned, whether to pass or whether to dribble, they will demonstrate it in the gameplay 1. So gameplay 1, gameplay small-sided gameplay 1 is what is important here, tactical application of decision making, what to do, whether to dribble or whether to pass. All right, after phase 2, Our teacher will progress in phase 3. Phase 3, teacher emphasize on skill development. How to do, right? Teacher will again use question and answer to discuss about the skill acquisition with a proper technique. How do you execute a close dribble, a loose dribble, close dribble, and then Indian dribbles? By using cues, the student will answer to the teacher to answer the technical question about 3 types of dribble. After discussing this, what you call teaching and learning about skills, the teacher will organize the student to practice. Probably the teacher will use a dynamic drill practice for all these 3 types of dribbling. If teacher find that the student could not execute well the dribbling skill, teacher might use static dribble for a short time. Okay, right. After practicing the dribbling skills, again, the teacher will organize them another gameplay too, whereby the student need to apply the skill, a proper skill in the gameplay 3. Hereby in the game and phase 4, what is important is the student must apply the skill in correct manner. Prior to that, teacher will ask them some tactical question before 3 versus 3 skill application. Teacher will ask them, when do you apply open, close, and Indian dribble? The student will answer, open dribble will be used when there is no opponent in front. When there is opponent in front, the student might answer, we do the close dribble. When you want to cheat the opponent, we might use Indian dribble. Okay, that is all about in phase 4. All right, in phase 5 is a accumulation activity gameplay 3. Gameplay 3, it is more difficult. Hereby I use 4x4. It's more difficult. So it's more difficult and more intense to play the game. All right. In the phase 5, the student, the teacher will prepare authentic game observation instrument for the student to observe their decision making, whether they are using a right decision, whether they are dribbling, whether they are passing, whether they are executing the skill in a what you call technically sound, whether they are cooperating, whether they are responsible in the team. This is an effective domain. So even though the teacher will explain to them. So in this case, teacher will use the student in groups to assess their performance, the psychomotor performance, decision making, cognitive performance, effective performance in a group. So prior playing of gameplay 4, the teacher will tell them, you got to assess your own self, your group performance. And in the phase 6, there will be a cooling down and limbering down with static stretching. And then after that, the teacher will give the game observation, authentic gameplay observation instrument, which contain psychomotor skill, cognitive decision making, effective domain. The student will fill in. And then after filling, the student in groups, they will do the reflection. How good they are in the skill performance of dribbling, how good in decision making, whether they have done a right decision making, whether to pass or dribble. And then finally, the teacher will do the overall reflection about their performance, gameplay performance. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a game observation instrument adapted from GPI by Michelle Griffin Oslin with permission. So you can see there's 2 components, skill execution and decision making. If they can execute skill very well, open skill, close skill, Indian dribble in their own team, they discuss and they give their group performance. 5 the best performance, of course. 1 is for the weak performance. As well as for the decision making, whether they make a right decision making according to the situation for passing or dribbling, they will give a high mark. If they make wrong decision, teacher will teach them to be honest, to give low marks. This is game observation for psychomotor and cognitive domain. Next slide, please. So this game observation instrument also adapted from Michelle Griffin Oslin. This is a game or domain assessment for field hockey using effective domain. The student will mark 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 the rubrics for their character in terms of cooperation and responsibility. So I think that's all. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Kanae.
Okay, thank you, everyone, presenters for the helpful informational lectures. So now we are going to open up to the floor for questions. Does anyone have a question and comments? You can use the chat feature if that's more useful for you, comfortable for you, or you can just unmute and then start talking. Anyone has any questions or even comments? Yes, Sam, please.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't come off on mute, but it's all fixed now. Yeah, so thanks very much for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. So thanks very much for all the presenters. I'm just really interested, really. I've got probably a few questions really from this presentation, but I won't take up other people's time because I'm conscious other people may have questions as well. But I'm really interested to know, really, we talk about sort of planning there. I probably got, first question with that is coaches using a game-based approach and teachers as well. I've seen examples, particularly from coaches from some sports, where the way their sport works is that the planning becomes something that they don't necessarily do before they get to their session. I'm thinking more of coaches here, and particularly some, depending on how the session works, because they may be relying on what their learners are telling them, their players. And I've seen examples where I've worked with coaches and they've got the ability, not necessarily to implement a game-based approach with a high level of fidelity, but they're able to use components of it, but they're able to get to the session and have conversations with their players and learners and deliver a session and use components of a game-based approach. And obviously that's demonstrating to where I would come from. And you may agree here with a high level of kind of pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge of the sport they've got. But I'm just wondering from your experiences then, in terms of your research and your own practice, how critical is the planning component for some coaches or all coaches, or is there almost this where, depending on where you are on your learning journey, the planning becomes more important to have more of a chance of being able to maybe implement it in practice? Whereas for others, it's a little bit less important, but I'm not saying we can be naive and just disregard planning altogether. But I'm just thinking around that in terms of your experiences and research in this field, if anybody's come across that.
Yeah, I'll go first, Sam. Thank you for your question. In my experience, the best coaches, whether it be at professional level or community level, and the best teachers have all been diligent and effective planners. They've pre-tested and thought about what their players or students need, and they plan purposely from those, from that evidence that they've got. If I think now at the professional and semi-professional level where coaches are paid pretty good money, and if I think of teachers, going in ad hoc and making it up as you go along is not the hallmark of a professional. So if we're going to get the best outcomes, we need to be deliberate and explicit in our planning based on the data that we have of the learning needs of the individuals that are in front of us. Otherwise, there's no need for us to be there.
I can also follow up that too. You know, like as a coaching perspective, we have a limited time with the athletes. So we really have to use the time wisely. So like expert coaches plans. And then like, to answer your question, based on what the athletes answers, you know, practice can go either way or other. So like some coaches have the scenarios, you know, different scenarios within the plan, or sometimes some coaches uses questions to guide the topic that they really want to cover on that day. But they don't say we're going to be covering this because you guys are weak on da. So they're like asking questions to guide athletes through the thinking process of why it's important to cover the certain topic of the game, so that the plans are still follows. Because otherwise, like Shane said, that coaches needs to use the time wisely, so as the teachers as well. You know, and then they can cover the topic, the important topics that they need to be covered to improve the team performances or like a players' performance. So I would go even if more experienced coaches of the coaches national teams, they have like a depth of planning, you know, like practice plan. Some of the coaches I've seen it in the national team levels, they plans like water break into that, you know, they put the water breaks and then amount of the time water breaks into the practice plans too. David, do you want to add something? Okay.
No, it's okay. I agree with you. I think that it's a really fair question. Thank you very much, Sham. Because normally, but most time that it should be both coaches and teachers trust their own knowledge, but without planning, and that's not the more effective way to teach and coach. Yeah.
Any other questions and comments? You mentioned that you have few, so feel free to ask more.
I have got another,
Can I-
but I'll let other people go if they've got a
Okay.
question.
Let's see. Any other questions from other people?
Can I answer Sam's
Yes,
question again?
Please.
Okay, but this is through my experience. You know, we plan to use game-based approach. At times, let's say there's a short period of time, maybe in school, you know, they have assembly and all that, maybe left 10 or 20 minutes to play physical education. So we can switch to the other method, maybe using direct instruction, whereby a teacher centered. At times we do that, you know, to finish the syllabus and all that. So at times it can be switched. You see the situation, but planning GBA, it takes a lot of time. So that is my take. All right, Sam.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions?
Looks like you're up again, Sam.
Is it me again? Is it?
Okay, there's another question in the chat. Let me read this one first. Despite being an excellent option in activities involving the games, each player performs a low number of repetitions of certain skills, such as kicks. What is the effectiveness of game-based activities in improving the ability to these skills? For example, kick. Good question. Wants to take
Great
this?
question, Lucas. And as I briefly mentioned in my section of the presentation, a game-based approach is not game only. The game sense approach that we use in Australia talked about the game may be the start of the lesson session or the focus and therefore the main components of the session, but it's not the only thing that coaches do. Brendan, Susie and myself have written 3 or 4 papers now in book chapters, publications, explaining that authentic use of a game-based approach uses multiple teaching styles. Central to those teaching styles are from the production cluster. There's Mostyn and Ashwin's spectrum of teaching styles. would call it, which puts the cognition to the players to be problem solvers in order to be able to progressively develop them as thinking players. But there is no one teaching style that is used in a game-based approach. A game is not the only thing you do, and asking questions is not the only thing you do. So the mastery of the coach or the teacher is knowing which students will be able to develop, in this case, the skill of kicking and the types of kicks, the variety of kicks, the flexibility and adaptability of movement technique to solve the situations in their context from playing a game, and those that will need to have some remedial work removed from the game and break down into a more progressive pedagogy in order to understand and be able to execute the movement patterns. Again, there is no one human being, there is no one way of doing it. The skill of the teacher is matching the teaching style to the outcome that will be effective for that individual player or that individual student.
Yeah, can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very important to know that is even we are repeating all the time game based. The game is not only game, it's not only this. But also important thing that most of the games, the modified games, are small side games. So when you are reducing the number of players because you are focusing something is happening in the game, when something happening in the game, for example, in soccer, is the 22 players are not involved, probably that 4 or 5 involved, so you are representing that section of the play. So the modified game normally includes a quite smaller number of players. In that situation, the number of skills you are performing are much, much bigger. And that's something that is not only logical, but have been measured by research. So that's very important. You are working in something, not only kicking, but passing, getting free, anything, and you are in a small side games, you will practice this in a bigger number and also in a meaningful way all the time because you are right in the center of the play.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a debate, depending on how to modify the games, you can still maintaining a decent number of repetition, but within the game-like situation. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
We know Sam's got one more.
All right.
Do you want to go, Sam?
I think he wants to try to unmute, right? Didn't he try to unmute himself? You don't have to unmute.
Farhan, I hope I've got that pronunciation right. I'm not sure what you mean by how critical pedagogical elements in coaching context. Did you mean what are the critical pedagogical elements in coaching context? I'm not sure what your question is.
How critical pedagogical elements in coaching context?
Can you type your question, Sam?
I'm unmuted now. It was sorry. It was just it wasn't allowing me to unmute. I can go next if you want, or are we got a question in progress?
No, you can go, I think.
Yep. Then maybe Farhan, you can like type in a little bit more follow-up questions to clarify that one.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So my question was just coming back, obviously mentioned in the presentation a couple of times was, the term non-linear pedagogy. And I'm just really a bit interested. I know this doesn't quite link into planning, but in terms of that term being used, I know in terms of it being used, I know you used it, Shane, there to explain in terms of how it's not following a linear process, unlike the TGfU model. And I'm just wondering, is that term being used just generically because we're saying that it's not following a linear process, or are we viewing it as a non-linear pedagogy in the sense of looking at the work that other researchers are doing under non-linear pedagogy, such as constraints-led approach, and such as it coming from an ecological point of view in terms of learning? Or are we just viewing it in terms of using the term non-linear because we're using that terminology to say, well, we're not following a linear process in what we're doing in a game-based approach? I'm just wondering how we're using that term, because I sort of see non-linear as an ecological way of learning coming under and linking to constraints-led. And I know that we can see where constraints-led would fit into a game-based approach. But then there's others that would say non-linear sits under the ecological way of learning, and a game-based sits under the constructivist way of learning. Sorry if this is a bit deep. Apologies. I know it may be going a bit off topic, but I'm just wondering how we're viewing that.
Because I used it in my presentation, if it's okay, I'll go off the bat first. I'm not a theorist, Sam. I'm an educator. For me, theories are useful in providing an explanation for your choices, but theory doesn't drive my practice. I'm a pedagogue. So what I understand about teaching for effective learning drives my practice. And there's over 100 years of research on teaching for effective learning and the things that help, regardless of what it is that you want to learn, improve your practice. So no theory has a trademark on terms. So yes, there are people who research from an ecological dynamics or an ecological perspective who will describe their pedagogical preferences as non-linear pedagogy because they don't follow a linearity of a traditional direct practice or command and practice pedagogical approach. But from a pedagogical lens, when those approaches are viewed, pedagogically, they look the same and have the same outcomes. So again, my lens on the world, I'm an educator, not a theorist. I'm not a coaching scientist. I'm not a skill acquisition person. I'm an educator. So therefore, I use the language in an educational sense to describe the pedagogical expression. And if I was to explain it, I would go into educational theory because I'm a teacher.
No, thanks for that, Shane. Thank you.
Yeah.
It just helps clarify it from my perspective in terms of the way you're seeing it. That's why I ask. That's all.
No, it's a great question, Sam, because I've been at numerous presentations where people are watching somebody's version of a game-based approach. And I know some people in the Constraints Collective, would maybe consider a constraints-led approach outside of a game-based framework because it comes from a different theoretical pedigree. But they watch it and they go, oh, that looks like that.
Yeah.
From a pedagogy, how is that different? They're talking about it differently. They're using different terms that to me, not to me, the people that was going to go, well, that means that, but they're talking about it like this.
Yeah.
And it becomes very confusing for practitioners, teachers, and coaches when it becomes about the theory rather than the practice.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. No, that's the way I view it as well, in the sense that we've got the two learning theories that are a way of viewing learning, but in practice, I see an awful lot of similarities between the two pedagogies.
Correct. And there's an awful lot of similarities. As Keith Davids wrote in a very good paper maybe a decade ago, there are actually a lot of similarities between an ecological dynamics perspective and a cognitive perspective. The ecological dynamics, some in the ecological dynamics camp keep going back to an information processing model that was illustrated in the 1970s. But cognitive science has moved on a long way from there, and there's a lot of neuroscience now sitting behind a cognitive expression. That's not to favor one or the other as a model of explanation, but I don't know that it's helpful to go into theoretical camps because that forces people to make a decision about which camp you're in, which for me distracts from teaching for effective learning. And what we know from well over 100 years of research on teaching and learning, we know things that make a difference and things that don't. Regardless of whether you want to come from a skill acquisition background or from an education background, there's pretty good evidence behind the things that make a difference and the things that don't.
No, thanks, Shane.
Good question, good discussion. Thank you. So just to, we have two additional questions we can cover quickly. The Susan asked, do you have a suggestion about when it might be best to use sports education alongside of TGfU? Do you believe it would enhance the learner experience? David, or
Yeah, I can do that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. I think both models are really good together. Depends. Well, TGfU or game-based approach is more focused on the content, but sport education is much more bigger. It's more about how you organize your lesson, how your students behave or associate with each other. In terms of us answering about when, probably that is a tough question, because when I teach sport education with a game name like Invasion game or Net and World game, I all the time use, when it comes to teaching, a game-based approach. I do not understand other way of teaching, but TGfU or game-based approach. So when I'm using in the teaching moments of sport education, I use it all the time together, we can say, because I use small side games, questioning, everything. So that would be an answer. I don't think that's very clear, but I want to say that if you're using the sport education and you have to teach by yourself, or you have to advise your student how to teach their peers, the strategies, elements, and everything would be based on game-based approach. So everything, all the time, that would be. But when you are using just TGfU or game-based approach, maybe you don't need to do the full sport education model. But if your students are familiar with the model and some elements, you can be it's very effective in terms of organization, in terms of keep the teams, some roles, and everything. If you don't to have to give all that energy that you need to fulfill the sport education model completely, you can keep some elements. Little by little, maybe you can do those two completely. I don't know if that's an answer.
Thank you.
That's the way I do.
Okay, just to respect of everyone's time, I'm just gonna go to the next question and the last question. So Farifan actually clarified, thank you. So is it critical to practice pedagogical methods in that coaching context to train players? What is your suggestions?
Yes, I think coaches practice their pedagogical method all the time. And as soon as you start with a game-based approach, you are playing with your pedagogical ideas. And just as players will practice to get better at their craft, coaches and teachers need to practice in order to become better at their craft, whether that be taking a risk and putting in new ideas into your teaching, into your coaching sessions, or practicing off camera, using a metaphor, being away from your workplace and doing that at conferences and workshops to put your ideas out there. In order to be a better coach, you need to intentionally and deliberately practice the skills that you want to improve on. If they're the pedagogical expressions of a game-based approach, then you need to practice it to get better at it.
Anybody else wanted to add something?
I think I can add in something.
Sure.
Critical pedagogy is quite important. When we organize gameplay situation, of course, our students, some will be very high skill student, some will be very having a low skill. So teacher need to strike a balance, how to arrange activities to cater different types of students. So hereby justice and equality is important. So a teacher need to have a critical pedagogy to organize activities for to cater this kind of student, varying skill level, varying intelligence, and so on. I think I've answered some part of his question.
Sure. Okay, thank you everyone for those great questions and then answers. Thank you so much. So once again, thank you everyone for being here and joining us today. Thank you for the presenters for presenting today. This is the last session of that Introduction to Game-Based Approaches webinar series. So all of that webinar has been recorded, and then the presentation slide as well are available on the TGfU website as well. Okay, once again, everyone, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you in the different webinars and different contexts. Thank you.